my standpoint, and God bless the Steve Owen family, sergeant out in Antelope Valley that was shot in the face yesterday and succumbed to his injuries. Very, very, very sad law enforcement family. But this is the kind of thing that we're getting now within the state of California, and I don't want to necessarily link that to some of the legislation that's occurred, but it's not making it easier as our crime continues to grow in California, and violent as well as property crime, and that's something that I find a reason to lend a voice in the legislative choir with someone that's worn a uniform for 30 years. So between the business background with great companies leaving our state, maybe being supplanted by smaller businesses, but those great organizations have left. We're rated the worst in the country by many different business publications in terms of our climate here to do business in. And I think we need, again, a business voice in the legislative choir of somebody that actually understands how we can retain businesses and maybe grow our business sector as opposed to watching them leave. And then the third thing, I've been very involved with is schools. I was founding president of a school. I went back to school late myself and did an MBA and a doctoral degree and taught a little bit. But the schools in California are not going in the right direction either. Our achievement scores are very, very low. Our dropout rate is very, very high. We're not investing enough in the actual students, and there's a lot of reform I think that is required there. And somebody outside the system oftentimes is somebody that can add some perspective there that may be lacking when you're right in the bubble there, being funded by a lot of special interests, which is generally the case in what you find in Sacramento. Lots of folks being funded by the special interests, and I am not one of the folks that are being funded by any special interests.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Gooch, and thank you, President Kimball, for opening up your space here, and to Rick and Adam and the folks at the Chamber. Jill, thank you all for having us this evening. I also want to say a special thank you, although I don't know if it's willingly or just by force, but to your students and for some of the young people for showing up. Hope you take good notes and do well in the class, but it's nice to see some youth in the room too, because you all have a serious stake in the future, not just of this district, in this region, but the state of California. I'm the younger of the two candidates, and I think, you know, the way I approach public service, if you couldn't tell, but the way I approach public service is really, the calculus for me is, how do we set this state on a long-term path to sustainable growth? Right? I want to see our economy thrive, and that's really the bottom line for a state legislator and for any public servant, is to keep your community safe, to make sure the basics are taken care of, that your roads are fixed and safe, that your neighborhoods don't have high crime, that your schools are taken care of, that the power is on, the water works, your rates aren't disproportionately high. And you know, these basics, I think, are in pretty good shape. I tend to actually be an optimist about the state of California right now. Our growth compared to the rest of this country is astonishing. Now, our GDP growth won't tell you the whole story. Yes, we're twice the growth rate of Texas right now, and despite Rick Perry or Rick Scott coming out from Florida trying to say they're hunting for our jobs, we're not losing jobs to those states. The data shows, Beacon Economics just put out a report last month that said, you know, only 1% of the job losses in this state are actually attributable to people leaving the state for other because of regulations and for other businesses. You know, to me, it's really about doubling down on what we're great at. And here in Ventura County, we are a tremendous jobs engine and an innovation engine that I think we can take more advantage of. So I do see some impediments to our long-term growth, and I think it all starts with education. I think incredible institutions like CLU, like CSUCI, Pierce, we have College of the Canyons in the district, and our high schools, middle schools, elementary, and even down to preschool. I think we should be focusing more on pre-K. You know, that's where our long-term path to growth lies. Because if we don't train our young people to be ready for an innovation economy and ready for a creative economy, we're not going to be ready to be competitive. So when you look at companies like Amgen, or some of the ag innovation going on out here, or the film industry starting to boom, I see tremendous opportunity for a state that I can live in for the rest of my life and raise a family and hopefully be able to afford a home. So that's my goal, is to make California a place that I can thrive and grow and live, and you all can too. So I appreciate you taking the time, and yeah, look forward to digging further into the issues.
Thank you. Let me start with Henry, and this is actually a question that just came up from the audience, but fits quite well with what he was saying. As a college student, my main concern is my ability to obtain a job after graduation. Because of this, I am worried by the rate at which companies are leaving the state. How do you plan to make sure millennials like me have jobs after we graduate?
So there is there's a lot of hype about jobs leaving the state, but the data doesn't bear that out. So I just talked about an economic analysis of all attribution of our job loss, and we have had some job loss even in Ventura County, right? Hospitality is down a couple thousand jobs, and we're not back to where we were pre-recession. For agriculture, we've lost about 1,500 in the last cycle, and our unemployment rate is actually not as competitive with the rest of the state. I think we're almost at 6% now. So we should be fighting to get that down, and I want to see us in the top 5 for lowest unemployment rates. But for me, I think at a school like this, if you have the opportunity to be in an institution here and you can actually afford to go to college, the world is your oyster. And to me, I mean, you look across the way over at Amgen, and if you're interested in biotechnology or interested in basic sciences, research and development, there's huge, huge opportunities. As I mentioned, the film and entertainment industry, there's a lot going on there too, and now we put $400 million in tax credits into that industry, and we've got 1.6 billion in growth, right? So we got good return on our investment, in my view, a little bit of taxpayer input, and a lot of private sector support. To me, the main impediment, really, to your ability to go get a good job is debt. And my big concern is that you're not going to make it through university on time, so completing in 4 years, getting through the classes you want to get through, and getting access early to the kind of career opportunities that you're going to need. If you're saddled with debt at 12% interest rates, you're going to be underwater for the next decade. So that's unsustainable. I'd like to see our debt refinanced, frankly, for young people, and cap it at about 6%. There's a proposal in the U.S. Senate right now, but I think at a state level we could do that too. So, I'm optimistic, but you're going to face a lot of challenges, and our ability to have a retirement and be able to buy housing and things like that are really challenging for people our age.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So many things in there. Where to start? Well, firstly, as an employer, I can tell you that it's not $15 an hour minimum wage that was of concern to an employer. It's the fact that it costs you about $45,000 to $50,000 now to employ somebody. And as a result of that, it becomes very difficult for an employer in a small independent business to employ people at the entry-level wage, to bring them in like most people have experienced in their life. You get brought in, you learn a trade, you learn a craft, and you kind of move your way up based upon your own energy and interest in wanting to continue to grow the company. But employers can't do that when you set the bar that high. And you can't necessarily pass the cost along to the consumer, because there comes a certain point where they balk as well. And that's something that Sacramento doesn't quite understand, because they live sort of in this unreality up there. But the people that actually are on Main Street that have to employ people and have to go to the bank for a loan and show cash flow projections and actually hire people are not hiring people, and they'll find it more and more difficult to hire people. And even the governor, when he signed that bill, said it may be a horrible social policy or economic policy, but it's a great political, maneuver, or whatever his verbiage was. But that was the basic underlying comment that he made. And that was true. It was a great political maneuver, but it's not good economics for the state, and it's going to be more and more difficult for employers to employ somebody. And Amgen, the company I know well, it's in the area, one of the biggest employers in the district here, is downsizing. And so is New Holland. They're downsizing because they can't build because of all the regulatory apparatus that goes along with trying to build in this state. And this area right here, we were just in an economic symposia about a week ago here in this very room with a nonpartisan dialogue around the economics of this area, and it's one of the few areas that's shown no growth in California. The reason it's shown no growth is because we've made it impossible for people to go ahead and build or develop or hire, and this area, again, has, economically speaking, a moth in front of me here, I don't have a twitch, is an area that's having problems as a result of that.
Question starting with Steve Fazio. Do you think cap and trade, the cap and trade program is working, or are we shifting emissions to other states and countries who manufacture goods that Californians used to produce?
Well, again, I think there's sort of this legislative arrogance in Sacramento. Cap and trade, basically by everybody's estimate, has not worked. It hasn't done the things that had originally been hoped to have been done. It just isn't happening. It is not working out. It's not penciling out. So it's made it harder on industry, and yet it's not developing the economic base to go ahead and build our high-speed rail or whatever the intended ultimate money was to have been used for. Certainly it's not going into infrastructure, which was yet another promise that was made, because we all hear about the fact that our infrastructure is in bad need of being redeveloped and remodeled, and roads are in need of being revitalized. So the cap and trade dollars are a promise that was made that's not happening. The program is a failed program. It was put back on life support recently by the passage of SB 32, and we'll just have to see how it ultimately pans out. But up until this point, it has been seen as a failure, other than by the legislators in Sacramento that are all in favor of the things that they feel as though is the right philosophy, but economically it has not worked.
I would disagree with my colleague here. I just look at the clean energy economy and the growth rates we've seen in solar, wind, battery storage, clean transportation, agriculture. Just the other day in the Ventura County Star, you look at a company like Agrimin, which is doing composting and smart fertilizer technology for the agriculture industry, but doing it with waste, right? Not using raw petroleum products, but using the waste from all the food that you guys eat in your homes and turning that waste into a profit for our ag industry. We now employ well over 500,000 workers in the clean energy economy. Now the fossil fuel industry employs far less. They're about 250,000 right now. So the growth is there, and the data bears that out. We've seen tremendous potential in expanding solar in this region. I think it's going to continue to be a boon, especially for the homeowners out there who don't want to pay as big a bill to utilities and want to find that independence from the grid. You know, I picture a future where you can just go home and your home will be just like a gas station or a power plant, but that you will have all that independence on your own. I was with a battery storage company today. It's installing 50 megawatts right in this region right now. That's going to give you control over your family's budget. It's going to give small and commercial businesses control over their budgets and not be susceptible to, say, volatility in the fossil fuel markets overseas. So I would say cap and trade has been a resounding success, and that's why countries across the world are copying us. They all come to us. When the delegations come from China or Europe or South America, they come to California and study how we do it, because our GDP is up and our carbon pollution is down. We have decoupled pollution from growth. Texas, half our economy, twice the pollution. So I think it's better here in California.
Good. Starting with Henry Stern, would you support or oppose Proposition 64, the legalization of marijuana? Why or why not?
So I worked in the juvenile justice system before I got involved in working in public policy. I spent time working in the max units in Alameda County, and then I also represented juveniles who were in trouble with the law in New York. I've seen marijuana have a serious impact on youth, and my biggest concern about the proposition is that the lack of accountability and regulation over advertising to young people is a grave concern to me. It permits television advertising, and I don't want to see us repeat the failures of the tobacco industry. And frankly, we don't have a handle yet on how the edibles market works or how concentrations work. So the ballot proposition doesn't put any restrictions on the concentration of THC in the commercially sold marijuana. So you could have it 70, 80% THC. That's not a joint from the 1960s. That is a very different product, and that has psychotropic and hallucinogenic properties that can have huge impacts on youth. So, you'd think that as the younger candidate, I'd be all excited about the marijuana initiative, but I think a lot more young people need to be standing up and saying no. This is not the kind of future we want to see, and we don't need this for our economic growth. People like to talk about the revenue. I think we can get there with a different source of revenue. So I think if it passes, we're going to have a heck of a lot of cleanup to do in the legislature, and you've seen that in Colorado, hundreds and hundreds of bills to clean up that ballot proposition. As a general matter, I actually don't like legislating from the ballot box. It's how we run into problems in the first place, because special interests get hold of these things and they have more control over it. You don't get as much of a say. You can come yell at me once, hopefully I'm your senator, and get me to change bills. It's very hard to do that with the lobbyists behind these propositions. So, I'm really concerned about 64. I don't think we know that how heavy that train is coming. We shouldn't be putting people in jail for smoking pot, but this is going to have a big impact on our young people.
So as a person that worked in uniform for 30 years, I can tell you we don't really put people in jail for smoking pot. And it's so accessible nowadays anyways, you can just basically get a prescription over the counter. I'm in complete agreement that it's a bad idea for us to legalize marijuana at this time. There needs to be far more thought put towards it. Colorado's already experiencing a dropout rate that's increasing, increased traffic accidents. We don't have a lot of ordinance thought put to this. Let's say you're in an office environment and you have a common air system and someone's out there smoking a joint over here. We're all so panicked now about secondary smoke for cigarettes, but all of a sudden it's okay to have, light up a joint in the office place or light up a bong or whatever. It makes no sense whatsoever. I really am not understanding why it is that people are that much of a proponent for it behind the economic issues. If that's the way we're going to find ourselves economically viable, then you can think of a whole host of things that we should then continue to legalize too. Where does that slippery slope stop? Might as well do heroin, and cocaine and whatever else. It makes very little sense to do that. It's not the right way to build a society. If you think about what you ought to do as a legislator, or even as an adult or a parent, what you're trying to do is you're trying to build a responsible citizenry. You're trying to build people that are highly productive, that are going to go on to achieve success, and these are not things that are ultimately in keeping with those goals in the least. So obviously I am not somebody that would be a proponent of that.
Okay. Starting with C. Fazio, transportation, what's the problem? Lack of investment in infrastructure, inadequate revenues, the tax structure. Assuming you agree that we have a major statewide and local, transportation difficulties, what's the main source of the difficulty and what specific policies would you recommend that might help to remedy the difficulties?
Well, we are experimenting in this district with different things. Out in like the Northridge area, we're looking at this one measure. I have a feeling that it's got a good shot of passing, and that'll help connect some of the lines out in that way. It doesn't do anything for this area. And again, the lack of growth has caused this area to have a lot of folks that are commuting all day long. I think when we were here at this economic symposium last week, we learned that there's about 100,000 vehicles that come and go every day because we have no growth in the area. And I think the goal is to be able to work and live somewhere close so you don't have to get in your car for 2 hours, and yet we've never really laid out our society and our municipalities in a way where we could actually maintain some sort of a lifestyle, where our office and our employment is close to where it is that we are. And we have to really start to rethink that, because we're not going to get rid of automobiles, and we're not going to come up with some sort of a magic solution overnight with regard to how much traffic there is in this region. But we can rethink how it is that we want to deal with our municipalities, how we want to deal with multi-use family, homes, and how we can redesign areas where people don't have to be in their car to get to work and go back and forth all day long. I think that's really the only solution. I'm also a proponent of green energy and making sure that we look for more ways of our reducing carbon emissions. But that's kind of a different thing. We'll just have electronic cars, on the freeway versus gas-operated cars. That doesn't really solve it. So we do have to continue to look at different ways to build all these little, municipalities so we're not on the freeway as long as we are.
I'm a big proponent for infrastructure investment. I think right now at a statewide level, we're about $8 billion short annually just on maintaining the roads. So not anything new, just making sure that you don't run over potholes and there's not unsafe streets and things are properly lit and things are maintained. So we're falling way, way behind, and I'm desperately seeking some Republican and bipartisan support up in the Capitol to step up and come up with some kind of deal just to do the basics. Congress has been slow also on pushing the Highway Trust Fund through. I do think it's encouraging to see at a local level that Measure AA is starting to move, and I have endorsed that initiative, which would put the feared word sales tax, but sales tax in place for those buying things in Ventura County that would go back to investing back in transportation infrastructure. My big problem right now with the current structure is that folks come in and use our services. They come in and stay in a hotel. They come to a restaurant from out of town. They go out for a hike one day. That none of that sales tax money is going back into your infrastructure. None of their dollars are frankly coming back, or very few of them are coming back to reinvest in our communities. And so when we go up to Sacramento to fight for upgrades at, say the 23 has a new off-ramp, or we're trying to deal with bottlenecks out on there's a 126 interchange that we've been trying to figure out for a while. It's a very hard sell to say the locals aren't stepping up and doing their part. So I think getting that infrastructure measure through, so that at a state level, we can push the state dollars down here and match, and even the federal dollars, you're gonna see a huge bang for your buck. And I'm not a big tax and spend guy, and I think we really ought to do a better job spending your dollars more wisely, but in this case, you're one of the only counties in the whole state that does not have a sales tax for their roads and transportation infrastructure, and I think it's time for that to change.
Okay, starting with Henry, you're up in Sacramento next year if you're elected. Are you going to oppose or support Governor Brown's high-speed rail project?
The high-speed rail. So we were the lone, Senator Padley, who I've been working for the last 5 years. So before I worked in the private sector, I was an attorney, and I started a tech incubator and some of the juvenile justice stuff I talked to you guys about earlier. But in the last 5 years, I've been her basically general counsel, her main advisor. And she was one of the lone Democrats to oppose the high-speed rail. It was a very lonely place to be in on that Senate floor. She opposed it not because she's against rail, because I think whether it's MetroLink or improving the metro system in LA, or I ride the San Francisco to Sacramento train from time to time when I'm up in the Capitol, those are really important systems, and I think we should be doubling down there. The problem with the current program is that they're starting in the middle. They're starting in Modesto and Bakersfield, and not a lot of people live out there. I do not support the current plan. It is not a financeable framework. The private sector is not buying these bonds because they don't see any ridership in their near future. I'd like to help the governor get that plan on track to a point where we're moving money down to the LA Ventura County region and up north where the riders actually are. Let's get MetroLink moving. Let's get positive train control. Let's deal with safety issues. Let's deal with grade crossings. Let's do the things that actually work, that you guys are going to see the benefits of, and not sort of chase this other dream of a system that starts in Bakersfield and maybe in 20 years gets here. I don't think we should legislate based on hope alone. So, I want to see some change there. I want to see some change, and I'm willing to stand up to do it. Sometimes you have to be able to part with your party to make some of those decisions, and I'm running to represent you. It's not about the Democratic Party or the Republican Party. It's about the people of East Ventura County and North Los Angeles County and the people of California. So your interest comes first.
High-speed rail is something that could only have been born out of the state capital. I mean, it makes no sense to anybody that I've met so far that lives in the real world, but it's for whatever reason continuing to make sense to people up in Sacramento. I'm glad that Senator Padley voted against it. 99% of her votes are right with that party line, and 99% of the folks in that Democrat Party and the progressives vote in favor of things, because if they don't go the party line, and that's what's wrong with our system, then all of a sudden they find themselves with an office, 2 miles from their capital office, or they find themselves losing their ability to be on a committee or chair a committee, and that's what's going on. It's a nasty game up there. It's kind of a one-party system up there. We are just 2 seats away from, if we lose 2 seats in the state Senate, we have one-party rule. So you're going to have 3 gentlemen, basically, if they retain their seats. You're going to have Governor Brown, you're going to have the Senate Pro Tem, and the head of the Assembly setting the agenda and pushing everything through. And that's a dangerous system. We have 38 million folks in this state, and I think you need a firewall against some of these wrong-headed ideas, such as high-speed rail, to hold that line of having increased taxes and to hold the line in terms of having some of these projects continue to go through, because that's exactly what's going to happen if we have a one-party system in this state.
Starting with Steve Fazio, a theme in presidential elections is certainly income inequality. In California, there are particularly sharp divides between the coastal cities and inland areas and another between the inner cities and the rural areas, and these seem to be getting worse. With California's high cost of living, we need employers and industries working at full speed to support good paying jobs. What policies would you recommend to preserve and grow jobs specifically for those who don't have a college degree?
Well, lots of things there. One thing is I would do some tort reform, because I can tell you as an employer, we get sued with nuisance lawsuits all the time. I mean, we pay out money for things where somebody, goes to lunch and they walk into a car, and all of a sudden that's the responsibility of the employer, because they're still on duty or whatever. Some of the things that I could tell you about in terms of the lawsuits that I've ever done for employees in my organization that are just so absurd, or just pay off something because we get sued, and it just, the lawyers will tell you, it makes more sense to settle for $20,000 or $30,000 than it does to, go ahead and fight this thing for the next 3 years, because it'll be $200,000. So employers are savvy to that, and they're downsizing in this region. Amgen is downsizing. We've lost aerospace. The reason that basically we do end up with some entertainment industry dollars in the area is because we do give a $330 million tax credit to the entertainment industry to keep from having more runaway production. But even at that, basically when they run out of the tax credit, they're so duplicitous that they still leave the state, even though they say that they love the state and they want to go ahead and pay more taxes, and they're okay with all these philosophies, and yet the minute they have an opportunity, they go somewhere to take a better tax break in another state to do their production. What I don't understand is why is there not a linkage in the minds of our legislators of, okay, so you're giving that industry a tax credit, and we're seeing more revenue come into the state. What about every other business? Why don't we lower taxes for everybody, and we'll see a proliferation of businesses, and we'll certainly see the current situation where businesses are departing, great businesses are departing. LA Times, hardly known as a conservative newspaper, pointed out that we have a 10.7% unemployment rate when you add the underemployed and people that gave up looking. So we do have an unemployment rate issue, but I won't even focus on that. I know about having great companies remain here. What Fortune 500s, what Fortune 100s, what Fortune 50s outside of the Silicon Valley do we see in this region at this point? Hard to find them.
So you're asking specifically about folks without college degrees, what kind of opportunities? I'm a big proponent, and I've been working in the Capitol on apprenticeship programs and trying to take some of our existing education dollars that are in the system for high school and let young people start looking at careers in the trades and in tech earlier, so that you don't have to get to be 18 years old and have to make that big life decision of what you want to be when you grow up and really have nothing at your disposal, right? You're either going into college or you're trying to find a job. And frankly, I don't think we should be pushing people to go to minimum wage jobs. That's very much the floor, and it ought not be the ceiling. It's a very tough go to raise a family on $15 an hour. So I think when you're 15, 16 years old, you should have the opportunity to apprentice, whether it's learning how to do electrician work or plumbing or pipe fitting, working on transportation infrastructure, going like they're doing right now with VC Innovates, which is using some of these funds. There's a fantastic program, those of you who don't know, in Ventura County. I think they've received about $30 million, maybe $35 million from the state over the last couple of years for a Career Pathways Trust to help young people get out of the classroom, right? If you're not built for the SATs and you don't love flashcards and your tests like I did, I think we should be teaching them much more kids than just the ones who want to be lawyers and doctors. And so if you're that kind of kid and you're in school in Ventura County, you're going to have the opportunity now to go visit job sites, to go have internships that are actively going to count potentially for course credit or towards an apprenticeship program. So to me, starting early, not enough to wait till after you graduate college and you're saddled with debt. You got to get a good plan together at a young age, and young people, it's a very competitive economy out there. It is a globally competitive economy. So if you don't have the right kind of guidance early on, and if you're just sort of going through the motions until you graduate, you're going to be in trouble. So I'd like to see us double down on the apprenticeship programs and the Career Pathways Trust, and keep going from there.
Thank you.
Yes.
For Henry Stern, the building and real estate development proponents cite over-regulation and difficulties in permitting as a major cause of housing scarcity, hence high prices in many areas, not just the Bay Area, but Ventura and Los Angeles counties. Governor Brown has recently attempted to ease regulation without success. Do you agree regulation and permitting are the major cause of housing scarcity, high prices, and what could be done about this?
I think regulation in government is always an easy thing to blame, whether it's how the economy's doing or how housing is doing. Absolutely, government has a role. It's also that this is an incredibly beautiful place that many, many people want to live. People are coming from all over the country to move here with high incomes already built in, can afford this market, whether it's San Francisco or out here in Ventura County or in LA. I would not characterize the governor's proposal as modifying the regulations. What he had proposed, I did not agree with, which was basically gutting any local voice in the land use development process. I'm in favor of preserving a role for cities, municipalities, homeowners to weigh in on what their communities look like. I think that's just a fundamental right, and that the state really shouldn't be preempting that based on what we think your community should look like. So I have some caution about those kind of proposals. This was called a by right build. That was what the governor proposed to build more housing. I worry about that. That said, we do need to build. And the answer from the environmental community cannot be status quo, because it's not sustainable. Right? Where I live in Canova Park, which is east of here, there's so much demand for people to be able to afford homes and invest in their communities, and there is demand for growth there, and they do want to see upzoning, and we're right near a transit line, right by that LA River along that orange line. People want to see growth. So if they say yes to growth, let's grow there. If Thousand Oaks says yes to growth and they want to pursue that specific plan, let's say yes to that. But I don't think we should sacrifice local voices in the development process under the auspices of the housing crisis, because the fact is the governor's proposal really only had a 5% minimum for affordable housing there, and most of the rest of it was just going to be upscale commercial retail development that probably wasn't going to benefit you much in the first place.
It's just become too expensive to build anything in California, which is why a lot of our developers are just going out of state. They're building in Arizona, they're building in Texas, they're building wherever they're building, but they're not building here because there's an ROI issue with trying to build here and invest here for development. You can ask any developer you'd like to ask. CEQA stands in the way. You can go ahead and shut down a project without standing. In other words, you don't have to have your home in the area. You don't have to be from the area. You can be anywhere and all of a sudden, file a CEQA lawsuit and shut down a project. There was a project in the district that we're running in Newhall, and they wanted to build homes. They were already permitted for the homes. A few people ended up suing under CEQA because there's, some endangered species, I suppose, or something after the fact, and all of a sudden, $100 million later in lawsuits, and that project has been stopped in its tracks. Very, very frustrating for people that have their money invested in that. Very, very frustrating for other developers that see how difficult it is to actually build in this state. And we do have a housing shortage, which there's a supply and demand model always at the bottom of this stuff. When we say that it's becoming more expensive to live here, one of the reasons is because we have a higher demand than what we have in supply. And if we had more homes, then the price would not continue to go up. So folks that were coming out of college, like my 4 kids, and others that are in the room here, when they want to buy that starter home, at least they'd be able to go ahead and afford to do so. But if we can't build any additional homes, then the existing homes continue to go up in value as we continue to grow our population. In addition to which, we have 47,000 homeless in the area, and counting. And we need to figure out how to do something with them as well. And there are investor dollars out there to be leveraged to go ahead and build some affordable housing, but you can't do it in the state. It's just become too onerous as a result of the regulatory environment.
Thank you. For Steve Fazio, what are your views on water? Should the state be more active, not just in coping with the present drought, but more importantly, contending with projected water shortages in the future? What policies would you recommend?
We need to be good stewards of water. Nobody's suggesting that it should be a wasteful situation like it maybe once was when we thought it was a never-ending resource. I get that. But we have to build some reservoirs. We have to build some ways of containing the water that we do have. And we have to be able to convey the water from north to south. And that's really one of the big issues in the state. When we have, again, a sitting governor who can hardly be called as somebody that's not an environmentally oriented person, and a U.S. sitting senator in Dianne Feinstein that are actually writing letters to try and see if we can back off of the Endangered Species Act so they can open up some of the pumps and fill the deltas with water so we can eventually have water for our farmland and for our municipalities. There's something wrong with that. And when you talk to the folks that run the water districts, you'll also get an earful, you know, in terms of how frustrated they are as well in being able to capture the water. We don't use that much water as a percentage of the overall water in the state down here in this southern region of the state. It's less than 10%. It's between 5 and 10%. Most of the water is being used in the Central Valley and up north, and yet we do have the storage issue, we have a conveyance issue, and a lot of that is also, again, back to the regulatory environment that's just become crippling to the folks that actually need the water. Yes, we probably do have a climate change situation going on. I'm not a denier in that regard, but we do have enough water to get down here if we could straighten out the regulatory environment and allow for us to be able to actually utilize that water. And if the governor has this tunnel project or something that will, you know, allow the water to not go out to the ocean and instead get conveyed into the reservoirs, I'm on board with that. There needs to be some solutions that make sense.
I worked for the last 5 years for Senator Pavley, who was chair of the Water Committee. So we went through some big battles. They say, what is this saying in California? Whiskey is for drinking and water is for fighting. This is an incredibly contentious issue. And especially when we got hit with this crippling drought, we went underground because the dams were drying up, right? The surface wasn't there, there was no rain, and we tapped our groundwater aquifers at an alarming rate. 60% of the water we were using during that period was coming from underground. And the law was so anachronistic, right? So outdated that we're really, until we passed a law in the legislature, we're the only state in the entire West that didn't even measure how much water its agriculture industry was using. So farmers, just whoever had the longest straw wins. That was basically the rule. And the folks, especially in Ventura County, who really, in the west part of this county, who rely on that groundwater, stepped up. I mean, the folks like Driscoll's out there and some of the berry farmers who are doing some very innovative things with saltier water and trying to find really efficient drip irrigation technology. They know that it's not just abundance forever and ever. They know we've got to do more with less. So we are, in the east part of this county, much more reliant on state issues because the east part of this county, especially in Cayugas, is very dependent on the state water project. So right, unlike Fox Canyon and on that western part of the county, this eastern part of the county is going to be relying on a lot of what we do up in Sacramento. That's why I'm proud to have worked on the statewide water bond, because that was a time when ag, farmers, environmentalists, and everyone in between got together, Republicans and Democrats, said, let's just start chipping away and fixing this. So yes, we're going to build some dams and reservoirs, but we're also going to start capturing more stormwater. We're going to start recycling more water because we're doing a paltry job. Compared to Israel and Australia, they recycle 85%. We're down in the 10s. So we've got to make some changes locally too.
Good. Let me start the last question before you do your closing remarks. Let's assume, this starts with Henry Stern, if elected, you take office in January, come spring they have what they call the budget revised. They re-estimate on the basis of what monies have so far come in and what the budget's going to be for the following year. You're part of the legislature and you're told California has an extra 10% surplus. What would you recommend? What's your priorities? What would you recommend, first of all, how that surplus gets deposited or spent?
So I'm environmentally conservative, I'm a conservationist, but also I'm fiscally conservative. Even though I'm a Democrat, you know, I think that there's a presumption that we'll just spend everything we get. To me, probably the smartest thing we ought to be doing with extra revenue in a lot of cases is paying down our debts. We still have a wall of debt we're facing as a state. And I think the rainy day fund has been an incredibly important investment to siphon off some of that extra money coming in every year to save up for when that next recession hits. So I think we could actually be doing a better job of paying down some of our long-term liabilities and some of our debts there. That said, The reimbursement rates for healthcare are paltry. Developmentally disabled folks who live out in this region have been starving for years after we shut down all the mental health facilities in the state under Reagan. There are a huge amount of demand for better mental health services. So I see, that is a major gap, and Ventura County is doing a heck of a job trying to plug those holes, but the state ought to be doing its part. So probably some combination of paying down debt and dealing with some of this mental health and these healthcare crises that are really eroding our communities very quietly, especially the elderly out here, though. It is an absolute injustice and moral turpitude to be allowing our elderly, our grandparents and our parents out there to be aging in poverty, and I can't stand for that. So we got to start chipping away at that too.
Okay. Steve Fazio?
You can't do much with 10% as it relates to the things I'd like to be able to do with some reform in the business side. So I'm going to leave that out because that's not really a money thing. That's more of a legislative fix. And I don't think that really costs money. It just requires people to change their philosophies on how to treat businesses in the state. I do think we have a homelessness issue, and we have to get serious about it. We have too many people living on the street. Families living on the side of streets. I don't know exactly like in this area where they may exist, but I can tell you in other parts of the area that we're running in, there is a proliferation of homelessness. And that is something that we could do and could use some money in order to build some housing, in order to make sure that we corrected our mental health system so we can get the help required for people that need that help to get off the street, to try to knock down some of the recidivism by doing some education and some training. So I think I would probably put some investment in homelessness, and I think along with that also would go a reduction in crime, and anything we could do from an educational standpoint we need to do as well, because our student achievement scores are way too low, and our dropout rate in high school is just not appropriate for who we are as a society and who we are as a state, and where we once were versus where we are now. We need to get our hands dirty and really figure that out with the unions, and really start to have some outcome-based measurement systems of how we deal with the schools. So schools, homelessness, crime, that would be my focus for any additional monies that we might be able to garner from the state budget.
We go to closing statements, 3 minutes, starting with Henry Stern.
Thank you, Professor, and thank you, Steve. Takes courage to run for office, and I think Steve, and you don't have to applaud me, but for people to step up in the community and put themselves out there, it's hard. And I want to thank you all for coming out tonight willingly or because of your class. Hopefully next time you come, because regardless of your grade. Civic engagement is the only way we're going to solve this mess, because you can read the papers and you can yell at the TV, but until you roll up your sleeves and really start leaning on your local representatives, nothing's going to change. So this election is very important because people pay attention to Hillary and Donald, and I get that. It's got some entertainment value, although it's kind of like watching a cage match. I don't particularly enjoy watching it anymore. I just want it to be done. Congress really isn't doing anything. But here at the local level, we're trying to make change, and we're not going to be perfect. And California is far from perfect, and we make mistakes. But we're giving it a go, and we're growing as a result. And I'm incredibly optimistic about the future, but we cannot get there without you. And I would say, especially to the young people in this room, you're the ones who have to live on this planet for a very long time. The kids born today are, they say, projected, and may live till 120 years old. What does California look like then? And how do we plan for that future? Because we are a very rich state. When I first started working here and I came back from the private sector, we were the 7th largest economy in the world. Now I think we're the 5th or the 6th, right? We're growing. We're bigger than Brazil, and we're bigger than India. And yet, 1 in 4 children in California live in poverty. And so if we can't rectify that imbalance, if we can't look at our poverty amidst all this wealth and try to find a way to bring up this next generation, we're not going to be able to sustain this growth, and we're not going to live up to our promise. So, my pledge to you is not that I'm going to be perfect, but that I'm going to be a listener, that I read everything, that I will read these bills before I vote on them, that I'm going to bring diligence and honesty, and I'll tell you when I disagree with you. I'm not going to hide the ball, you know, I want to reemphasize, yes, I'm running as a Democrat, and I think the Democratic Party has a lot to offer, especially as the Republican Party starts to get taken over by some stranger currents going on around this country that really turn me off. The xenophobia and some of the anti-gay and anti-immigrant rhetoric, just, it hurts me as an American. But, you know, I think at a state level, we can find a better way here, and I would just encourage you all, cast that vote all the way down that ballot, right? Finish the job. Don't just end at the top, but just show up and get an equity stake in this process, because we cannot do this without you. So thank you for hosting this tonight, and thank you for staying engaged, and you can find me afterwards. I will give you my cell phone number. I'm serious about it. You can hunt me down anywhere. And you know, my girlfriend and my family does not like it very much because people call me at all hours of the night, but I'm running to be your servant. That's why I'm doing it. So, thank you.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, it does take courage, particularly to run as a Jewish Republican in California. So, I'm not running for this as being a second career. I'm 56, we have 4 kids, we have a business, it's a decent life that we lead. I'm running because I think it's really important for our kids. I think it's really important for our state to have somebody in the legislature that's just not another person that's kind of working their way through the system there, as much as someone that actually brings some actual real-world frontline experience to the legislative voice in the choir up there. I've been in business. I know what the difficulties are and the challenges are to own a business in this state, and some of them, again, are absurd. I understand law enforcement. I wore a uniform for 30 years. I handled thousands of calls for service and talked to many, many victims. I was the founding chair of a school, and I'm still on that board 16, 17 years later, so I understand EK through 12th grade and some of the reforms that need to be dealt with there. They're not just campaign pillars. They're things you can go and look and see that I've actually done, and it's a set of experiences that I would bring to the state legislature. And I think one-party rule is not helpful. I think there does need to be that firewall. I think that Prop 13 is at risk, and I have a mom and 2 uncles that are in their 80s that live in the district, and I don't want to see them all of a sudden lose those protections that they deserve to have and not worry about their property taxes skyrocketing to some market-based rate. I don't want to see our taxes continue to go up because we don't know how to manage the $160 billion that we already have, that we do a lousy job of with our schools, with our public safety, and with our business climate. So I think we do need some reform in California, and I don't think we're going to get it with a business as usual approach, and I don't think we're going to get it if we just allow for the one party to continue to rule everything that goes on in the state. I think there's grave danger in that. I'm not, again, running for this as a job or a career for my future. I'm not trying to be your next, congressional member. I don't know, I'll be too old by then. Well, I guess you look at the national campaign, and you're never too old, I guess, to run for things. But I am not Donald Trump. He was not on any list that I ever had, with regard to who I'd like to see as a representative of the ticket on the Republican side. I am equally, disgusted with Hillary Clinton. Neither one of them, I feel, as though are great representatives of that office. The office, deserves more stature and grandeur than what it's going to get with either of the two of them. But it is what it is. But this district, where I grew up, where I raised my family, where my family lives, where I have my business, where I police the streets, where I built a school, that's what I care about at the moment. That's where I want to try and make a difference over the next 12 years, and that's why I would really like your vote as your next state senator in this area. And thank you for coming out. Thank you for your time, and I've enjoyed it very much. So thank you. Nice to see you, Henry, and Happy New Year.
All right. Let me give the candidates an applause. Concluding this portion, they both mentioned they would be available toward the back. Thank you to our sponsors.